Echoes of Wisdom is a surprise game we didn't think we'd get, but ended up getting anyway from Nintendo and Grezzo's partnership. Being a game absolutely in the same vein as both the Wild games, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, but taking the top-down approach of the classic Zelda games such as Link to the Past, the Oracle games, and of course Link's Awakening, the very game they developed a remake for themselves. Grezzo has firmly cemented itself to be a great partner studio for Nintendo on making Zelda remakes, but with the only non-remake Zelda game under the belt until now being Triforce Heroes, a critically mixed game, how does Echoes of Wisdom stack up as their second, uniquely designed Zelda game? When you start up the game, just like the two games before it, the game immediately shifts into a cinematic cutscene of Link breaking into Ganon's hideout. And just like the game before it, Tears of the Kingdom, this cutscene is actually mostly playable, which is great. I love these more interactive scenes. As a fully powered Link with access to the highest level sword, bow and bombs, you face off against Ganon in a fight you could take seriously, or you can simply face tank it because you are the healthiest man on Earth. After Ganon is defeated, he opens the rift and catches Link by surprise, who uses his last moment outside the rift to save Zelda from imprisonment. This is when the gameplay shifts from Link to Zelda and she escapes and returns to the castle. Unfortunately, when another rift shows up and shadows take on the forms of the king and his left and right man, yes, that's literally what they're named, love it, Zelda just ends up bouncing from imprisonment to imprisonment. Luckily, this is when it turns out a creature named Tri has been following her. Tri is intrigued by the fact that Zelda can see it and decides to help out, giving her the Tri Rod. With the power of echoes on their side, the pair escapes by conjuring up objects and the adventure begins. Now the Tri Rod is one of three major aspects of the gameplay, conjuring up both echoes of objects you've found, but also enemies you've defeated to fight at your side. I found most of these enemies to be kind of useless, with some major standouts, but the objects themselves I found to not only be surprisingly varied, but each tends to have their own use case. Early on you'll find a rock, boulder, potted plant, bed and trampoline, and each of these varies in size whether vertically or horizontally, allowing you to traverse vertically with some good logical thinking. Plus, this makes the early game a game of throwing rocks at your foes, which is honestly a great time for a little while. Zelda herself can jump half a Zelda's height, and every level of verticality is measured in half Zeldas. The trampoline is one half Zelda, but launches you up by a full Zelda, which means that by putting down a trampoline in front of a boulder, then placing a trampoline on the boulder, you can gain a height of 2.5 Zelda. By cleverly placing things down, you can easily go wherever you want to go and do whatever you want to do, which is precisely why the puzzles themselves tend to be done with a mixture of this freedom of building, and the secondary power Tri has, which moves enemies relative to yourself, or moves yourself relative to enemies when locked on. The power itself is very ultra hand-coded in what it looks like, but does an excellent job at distinguishing itself and a much better job at being a Zelda puzzle solving tool. It makes you think not just about what echoes you have on hand, but also your environment and echoes that might have been available in a previous dungeon room, echoes that might be available in this room, and even echoes you may have gotten several dungeons ago. These puzzles are often designed around spatial awareness and your skill in timing and execution. While they were often a little on the easy side in my playthrough, I do have to make note of the fact I've been playing Zelda games for a good 25 years now, so these skills aren't exactly new to me, which is exactly why I'm happy to say that some of these rooms had me stumped for a little bit, until I figured out what to do and gave me that aha moment when I finally managed to figure it out. There are so many different factors at play with the echoes that it can be hard to keep track of them all, and The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom isn't shy about trying to use every single one of them. You'll find that by the end, you'll still be using earlier echoes through a clever assignment of different costs and effects. No echo is truly the same. But as previously mentioned, the same doesn't necessarily go for enemy echoes. While some are very useful, others basically cannot do anything in combat. Dark Nuts, for example, are cool to have on deck in theory, but they're so slow that I never find myself using them over the myriad of other options at hand. Instead, my playthrough was infested with crows, electric keys, and buzz blobs. Buzz blobs in particular are great as a combat tool because they immediately throw out a shocking hitbox in front of you. Or with a later abilities to send echoes flying, you can practically use them as electric grenades, which, wow. That's good. That being said, a lot of the enemy echoes are also used for puzzle solving, like Strantula's ability to immediately create upward ladders in the form of spiderwebs, or Ignazol's ability of arson. Generally speaking, every echo is used for something, but not all of them are made equal, to say the least. That being said, collecting them is great joy no matter where you are. The final power is Swordfighter form, and this is where you tend to no longer need the enemy echoes for combat, because this allows Zelda to turn into Link temporarily. This first unlocks as you find Link's Link's sword and upgrades and options as you find more of Link's tools. However, as you progress through the game's dungeons, you'll find more and more of these mysterious rocks known as might crystals. And these can be used to upgrade each of Link's tools and your stamina gauge. If you want my advice, focus on the stamina gauge and then the sword. Everything else is secondary since you have more options for those. The sword is mainly used to quickly slap enemies out of your way, but also to absolutely shred through bosses. And although there is a gauge attached to it, much like the Wild Games' stamina management, you can supplement your stamina with drinks. I usually ran around with 5 full refills, made with electro apples and rock salt, so it was never really much of a problem. Zelda herself can be further customized with accessories, and where you start with one slot, you can get more later down the line. From simple abilities like increased swim speed and defense to absolutely game-changing abilities like increased jump height, you'll find there's a wide variety to pick from, and some of these will most likely never leave the slot they initially occupy. You'll also get to change your outfit, and these are usually acquired through things like side quests. Oftentimes, these can be fun little activities such as looking for a Deku Scrub playing hide and seek across various locales, figuring out how to lure away a cat, finding the imposter among the High Royal Guard, and so much more. I found myself having a great time with some of these side quests, and the rewards were all worth it, as shops are stocking great items in this game, including quite a few of the accessories. So even the rupees ended up a worthwhile reward in my entire playthrough. And finally, the moment we've all been waiting for. Let's talk about dungeons, which honestly, to me, they might be the best dungeons any new Zelda has seen in the last 10 years. There are effectively 2 types of dungeons: side rifts that take you to the Still World, a Pokemon Platinum Distortion World-esque area that features platforming challenges, as you find upwards of 5 clusters of Tri's friends to rescue, harkening back to the way the wild dungeons are designed with their terminals. These are bite-sized and challenge you mostly on your traversal skills, and as such become easier as you gain levels. Some of these are part of the main quest, while others are accessible on your own terms, so if you see them on your map, give them a whirl. Rewards include a little bit of power for Tri to level them up, and might crystals to further strengthen your Swordfighter form. Second, the main dungeons, which also take place in the Still World, but are more akin to your standard bird's eye view Zelda games. These are filled to the brim with Link's Awakening-esque side view sections and feature a mix of logic puzzles that test your abilities in both traversal and reasoning. I genuinely found it interesting that across my time with the game, I did not run into too many repeat solutions. I only ever thought I cheesed the puzzle once, and although Tri's increasing power did start leading to an over-reliance on bed staircases in the travel department on my end, I don't think that is necessarily a bad thing. I think this expanded option is a great reward for making it further into the game, when the player has already been forced to use creative solutions for so many problems. Because one issue I had with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom was that front-loading the player with every abilities tended to have players latch onto something that worked as a baseline, and only deviating from their own norm when properly challenged to do so. Echoes of Wisdom flips the script a little bit by giving the players access to most abilities from the get-go, but locking the finer details and stronger portions of the abilities behind several upgrades. While I understand that the games are inherently different, as this game is, despite having a very open nature, very linear in its execution and story, but this is greatly to its own benefit. The easiest way to explain it is that this game follows the Ocarina of Time formula a bit in that regard. You must tackle each group of dungeons in order, but have the freedom to clear those dungeons in whatever order you see fit. With the way these dungeons are grouped together, it was clearly easier for the developers to create puzzles of increasing complexity and continuously introduce new aspects to the powers and echoes of wisdom. All that to say, in this game, dungeons are finally back from the shallow grave they were buried in. That being said, I've been positive this entire time, but I do want to talk about this game from a technical standpoint as well. As while the game's gorgeous stylized designs from Link's Awakening remake are further improved upon, the game itself is constantly chugging along, switching from running at full speed to half speed at a moment's notice. Although this normally doesn't affect gameplay, there are some areas where the frame drops get so intense that it actually starts eating your inputs at times, making some places very difficult to get through for no real reason. Thankfully, that's none of the very combat heavy areas for the story, but it is a shame that a game like this still isn't running consistently, and while I do have the hope that a backwards compatible Switch successor could theoretically solve these little chugging issues, it shouldn't be this much of a problem on the console the game was initially targeting. With that little tidbit out of the way though, the game is very inoffensive in its visual design and even brings back races and creatures we haven't seen in ages, while updating the more common creatures to a newer design, such as with the River Zora and Ocean Zora both existing in this game, and the Dekus once again being a part of a Zelda game as actual civilized people. Sort of. As a longtime fan of the Zelda series, it was a treat to see all these types of characters again. I don't know if I can fully explain the happiness it brought me to have the decos be absolutely stupid on my screen again. It's great. To me, Echoes of Wisdom is a great little game that, while obviously developed as a budget title, scratches the very same itch in Zelda games that wasn't being scratched in the Wild games. It's filled to the brim with interesting but silly characters, fun gameplay, fun dungeons with increasing difficulty and complexity, many towns, its own world to uncover with its own take on a very standard Zelda story, all while maintaining a certain level of openness and feeling of an adventure you're allowed to pace yourself. Sure, it's not as grand in scope as the newer games have been, but if you are a Zelda fan, you absolutely owe it to yourself to give this game a chance. I've seen many players worried this would be another Princess Peach's Showtime, or just the third in a series of sandbox Zelda games, but this is not the case. This is a true top-down Zelda that takes the best of the linear games and open games and fits it into a neat package that's deceptively big. It's not meant to hold your attention for 300 hours in a single playthrough, but if you can get over that, you will undoubtedly have an amazing time with this game. To end this review, I just want to share this little moment that happened to me in the early game. I was a bit lost on where to go, as wherever I went, I could not figure out a path forward. Everything was blocked, I thought. So I started messing around, and eventually I just thought to myself, if I know modern Zelda, there has to be something my gamer brain isn't thinking of. So I started thinking out of the box, as in I literally escaped the confines of my perceived play area by using a trampoline to get onto a tree and escape onto what I perceived to be the walls of the game world. This right here. This is what made the game click for me.